Dear colleagues, I'd like to present results of the experimental research aimed to examine the impact of psychological and learning training on educational motives and reflective skills of future IT specialists. This research was conducted by the team of lecturers from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Melitopol State Pedagogical University. The main questions of my presentation are: what is motivation, what is reflection, research essence and results. I'd like to start by the role of universities in modern world. In this short speech, I note a few key points. Nowadays, universities are the centers of high-quality fundamental education, which is based on the principles of competence and student-oriented approaches. Universities are designed to meet the needs of other stakeholders, including the labor market and academia. One of such urgent requests is the need to implement educational programs of a shortened cycle for IT specialist training. Our research led to identify some contradictions that hinder the efficient professional training of future IT specialists. In particular, between the requirements for the professional level of IT graduates and insufficient motivation of higher education students to study and improve their skills. Between the educational needs of students and the limited ability to build individual education trajectories with a combination of different forms of education at universities. Between the availability of students with professional competences formed during the previous level of education and the IT bachelor's curricular content at universities. To overcome these contradictions, we developed teaching technique. This technique contains means for development of motivational, cognitive, operational, communicative, and reflective individual spheres. In this report, I focus on forming of students' motivation and reflective skills by the means of psychological and learning training. I'd like to discuss the main concepts of our research: motivation and reflection. First of all, to be motivated means to be moved to do something. There are two main types of motivation: extrinsic and intrinsic. Intrinsic motivation refers to doing something because it is inherently interesting or enjoyable. And extrinsic motivation refers to doing something because it leads to a separable outcome. Here you can see self-determination theory's taxonomy of motivation. According to this theory, intrinsic motivation is connected with person's autonomy and concerns a sense of initiative and ownership in one's action. Turning to reflection, I will note that there are different approaches to its definition. For example, Marshall states that reflection is a careful examination and bringing together of ideas to create new insights through ongoing cycles of expression and re-evaluation. According to other approach, there are three different meanings of the reflexivity concept. The first regards reflexivity as an individual's considered response to an immediate context and making choices for further direction. The second defines reflexivity as an individual's self-critical approach that questions how knowledge is generated. The third is concerned with the part of emotion plays in work practice. In this study, we focus on the formation and development of students' intrinsic motivation. We consider its aspects: motivation to continue education and training, motivation for professional activity as a software engineer. We consider reflective skills of future IT specialists as an ability to self-understand, analyze, and evaluate yourself as an individual, a specialist, a member of software developers team, as well as your own actions in the current situation, past and future. Our technique involves such elements: motivational training, training exercises, learning training. Some examples of these means are given on this slide. I'd like now to discuss the experimental design. The impact of psychological and learning training on motivation and reflective skills of future IT specialists was examined within the framework of pedagogical experiment. It was conducted during 2016-2019 at Ukrainian universities, in particular Bogdan Khmelnytsky Melitopol State Pedagogical University. The number of control group was 207 persons. The number of experimental group was 198 persons. Experiment included two stages. At the ascertaining stage, the initial level of motivation and reflective skills was examined. At the formative stage, developed technique was implemented in the experimental group. The empirical data were processed with Kolmogorov-Smirnov test and Fisher test. We considered that each of individual characteristics had 5 levels of forming, namely low, critical, medium, sufficient, and high levels. We used special psychological techniques to estimate students' individual characteristics. Let's consider the results of formative stage in more detail. You can see that the percentage of students with a sufficient and high level of motivation in experimental group exceeds the same percentage in control group. Here, you can see that the percentage of students with a sufficient and high level of reflective skills in experiment group exceeds the same percentage in control group. Here, the results of processing of empirical data as formative stage of the experiment are given. Statistical tests shown that there are significant difference between control and experimental groups. I'd like now to recap. Nowadays, psychological and learning training are widely used in formal and informal education to improve of learners' hard and soft skills. We develop pedagogical technique which involves motivational training, training exercises, and learning training, and then examined its efficiency for IT education. At the end of formative stage of the experiment, a positive trend in the formation of students' motivation and reflective skills was recorded in the experiment group due to implementation of the developed educational technique. So we can state that its implementation is effective and has a positive impact on the improving of motivational and reflective spheres of the personality of future IT specialists. Further research is aimed at developing and testing personalized training programs for use in the educational process of universities. Thank you for attention.